Hello and welcome to the 9th video of the Risk Blueprint. In this video, we will talk about identifying and selecting leading key risk indicators. I will take you through the different steps to define leading KRIs, their 4 categories and some applications, and finally, reporting and governance on key risk indicators. Leading KRIs are metrics of risk drivers. In other words, they are proxy of causes. Now, in these obvious examples, you have a tired driver elevating the risks of collisions and then eventually an impact with damaged cars. Now, what is the proxy of tiredness? Well, it's a bit inaccurate. You can have continuous driving times. That's usually working or in applications for taxi drivers or bus drivers. You have more exact proxies for alcohol intake with the alcohol test, or even more precise proxies with speed with the speedometer. So another message of this visual is that when you are looking for key risk indicators, trying to have the most exact or the most reliable metric proxy of the causes of an event. Now, years and decades of operational risk management and non-financial risk management in firms have highlighted some common key risk indicators that I would like to share with you. Common KRIs of fraud and of a lot of incidents actually are around abnormal patterns, or let's say even more generally, abnormalities. This is the motto of the New York Metro: if you see something, say something. Or in the UK London Metro, see it, say it, sort it. If you see something abnormal, you need to say it and it's going to be sorted. So any sort of abnormal transactions is a potential key risk indicator for anti-money laundering or financial crime. Abnormal trading pattern is a good KRI for rogue trading. Abnormal spending patterns is used for decades by credit card companies as suspicions of fraud. So you can already generalize KRIs in your organization as all significant flag of abnormal behaviors or abnormal transactions. Now, more specifically, KRIs of errors would capture the slips, which are the involuntary errors, or the mistakes, which are due to lack of knowledge or misleading guidelines. So something like time on the job, handover training, guidance and feedback of error are good proxies of competence. Time of the job on the job is an easy one because it's easily accessible in HR data, and it captures the familiarity of a staff to a task, which both highlights its productivity, its speed of executing transactions, and also its reliability. So that's an easy one to use. We know that spikes of activities, but also drop of activities, so overactivity or underactivity of employees or of human beings, influence the reliability, the error rate. And then finally, over time, over a cumulative period, or vacancies and overstretch will increase the error rate. A well-known KRI in the medical industry, for instance, are continuous times in the hospital for interns. For instance, it's only recently, sadly, that this minimum time has decreased from 48 hours, which sounded crazy in terms of tiredness and error rate, down to 24 hours on duty. So these are some examples. But if we systematize this approach, I would suggest to use 6 steps in your KRI program to really identify the essentials of your leading KRIs. The first step is identify the key risks to your organizations, because in order to deploy this program of indicators, it needs to be worthwhile because it's quite costly and effortful. So you want to dedicate that only to the important key risks in the organizations, and hopefully you know them by now. The second, you need to have a good view of the causes and the root causes of these risks in order to capture these causes, to capture these drivers into your metrics. And you don't need to have all the causes absolutely boiled down. You need to capture essentially the elements that you're not so good at. And for that, I'll refer to you to the videos on the bow tie analysis and on the patterns of failure. Because what you want to capture as part of your risk management program is the monitoring of what you're not good at, not what you're good at, because you're good already, okay? You want to use risk management to improve on your failure, not necessarily to congratulate yourself all the time, even though once in a while it's good, but you don't want to give yourself a false sense of security. And so once you have a good idea of what you need to measure, well, recycle. Recycling is good in a lot of cases and also in risk management. So your key performance indicators, your key control indicators, the KPI and KCI here on this visual, when they're amber, they're good KRIs. Basically, a failed performance is a key risk indicators and a failed control is a good leading KRIs. I'll come to that again. Once you know all the causes, what you have, then they possibly have some missing metrics. There are possibly some missing metrics that you might want to choose to collect in order to capture the causes of your incidents. And once you know what you want to collect or what you want to know ideally, there comes from the reality test with the design. Where are your data coming from? What are the frequency you're going to report your KRIs on? What's the reporting governance? And what are the thresholds? And again here, the golden rule of reporting that we've seen in another video, i.e. the value of information needs to exceed the cost of collection, that's where this rule comes full into forces. Because you might very well realize that what you wish you know is actually quite time-consuming and lengthy to collect, and you may choose not to collect it. And then finally, very important step, and if you remember the first video, the maturity of the framework, when I talk about the feedback loop and the validation or the checking of the effectiveness of your risk management framework, but this is its application for key risk indicators. So when you have key risk indicators in your firm, look and ask yourself whether or not these have helped preventing incidents or not. If you don't know, there's probably a lack in backtesting. More details on that in the text available. Now, one important quick win when you are new in deploying leading KRI program, look at your performance indicators, look at your control indicators. Like I said, a failing performance is a sign of risks. When you have your IT response time that starts to be too long, your customer service program that starts to be failing, or even more specifically, when you have control functions such as back offices, accounting, finance reconciliations that are failing, you have at the same time a failing performance indicator, a failing controls because it's a control function, and an elevation of the risk because when your control doesn't work, your risk is elevated unless your control is useless, and then you can get rid of it altogether. And I'll refer to you for that on our video on control, internal control and control design. And so putting all this together, you can consider four nature of key risk indicators in firm. The first two are more for top-down, so common to the whole firm. The latter two categories are more bottom-up and process specific. First of all, exposure environment. These are more one-off KRIs and they relate to the change of your environment. It can be geopolitical indicators, the proximity of an election or a change in government, can be an indicator of a change in business environment for firm, and therefore key risk indicators in a sense of need of elevated vigilance. You can have that for extreme event warnings or change in regulations or new tax regimes, etc., etc. Stretch indicators are pretty straightforward. They measure how much an organization is under stress. It can be human stress, so that's captured with vacancies and any replacements and turnover, any sort of metrics that would be typically monitored by the HR department. Obviously, you can have a stress of systems, and these are capacity usage, buffer capacity, reduction of buffer capacities of systems, backup testings, etc. All these sort of mitigation plans and the measurement of it are part of the stress KRIs. And then you have, especially in heavy industry, the infrastructure, the stress of the infrastructure, maintenance, overdue maintenance, renewal, renovations of infrastructure, whether it's rails or roads or energy. These are critical indicators that, if they're not monitored properly, can lead to infrastructure to break. Then you have the third categories are the ones we covered already, what I call the failure indicators. So these are around failed performance or failed controls. They, in majority of organizations, they will be a recycling from metrics that are collected already. And then finally, you have this residual category, which is all other causes. So the metrics of, let's say, inherent causes. And the example you see here on this visual is, if your shoelace is undone, you're more at risk of tripping over. So an undone shoelace would be a causal KRI. And so in order to make this a bit more concrete, I refer to you to this table that is also extract from the chapter 18 of my book dedicated to a case study on information security. And here you have a quick applications of the four, or illustrations of the four different types of key risk indicators apply to information security. I let you read this at your leisure, but I will just pinpoint a few examples. In exposure KRI, a good one are the number of users, or more specifically, the number of super admin access in excess of the norm. You know that one of the more important control in information security are the diffusion of information on a need-to-know basis. If people have more information than they need to know, you have an unnecessary exposure of the risk of leakage or misuse of this information. That would be typically an example of an exposure key risk indicators. Example of control failures indicators, very easy in information security when you have a large number of controls. An example here would be overdue resolutions on penetration test recommendations. You have a pen test, you have some actions plan highlighted. If you're late on these action plan, it's a weaker control, therefore it's a KRI. Stress KRIs would be stress, workload stress on the IT department, for instance. Number of change requests per staff is a classic one of measures of overload in IT department. And finally, causal KRIs would be capturing the risk awareness culture, the IT safety culture, so you can have conduct metrics on employee compliance or repeat offender on phishing tests or fake phishing tests, just to give you some illustrations. Now, a question I have all the time, and it's a classic one in the field, is how many KRIs? And the answer I would give you here is the answer for a lot of elements of a risk management framework, which is the minimum meaningful. Minimum meaningful means that you want to be scarce, you want to be concise in the information, because you don't want information overload, and you don't want to waste resources in collecting information that you don't really need. Remember the golden rule of reporting. And for that, you need essentially one KRI per significant causes of the risk, and when one KRI is significant for the drivers of impact. And try to have KRIs indicators that are as independent from one another as possible to reduce precisely this information overload and reduce the cost of collection. Design of KRI is particularly important, and I warned you already of the misuse of averages during the incident data collection. It is particularly necessary to bear in mind when you collect key risk indicators. Here, if you see this fictitious distribution, you have peaks and drops. So if you average this and consider these are observation of customer satisfactions per call center or waiting line per retail branches or online calls, whatever it is, you have very good performers, you have very bad performers. If you average this distribution, your KRI won't tell you anything because you kill the information on the deviations, whereas information lies in the deviation. So make sure that you set thresholds on key risk indicators so that you precisely capture these abnormalities, whether they're positive abnormalities or negative abnormalities. And you want to capture these positive outliers because either they're wrong information and you need to know them, or they're particularly good practice and you need to also learn from success, as we have seen in the bow tie analysis. And then finally, the governance of indicators should be harmonious across all the parts of your organization. You don't have indicators, or you should not have indicators that are really red or not so red. You can adjust the threshold, but make sure that each color responds to an action. So green is you're happy and you keep things as they are. So it's a status quo, do nothing, non-action if you want. Amber is vigilance, monitoring, because you are approaching the danger zone. And red is a call to action. The risk has exceeded the risk appetite and tolerance. If you want more detail of that, I encourage you to watch our video on risk appetite, structure, and monitoring. So these KRIs colors need to drive action, and it's good to have a plan, again, a contingency planning before that triggers. So have in place a governance structure for your KRIs and contingent mitigation planning in case you hit the red zone. Have a governance that designate an indicator owner that is accountable for the results of the KRIs and for the plan. And like always in the good practice of risk management, you document what you're doing in order to produce auditable report. For a starter pack on key risk indicators, visit our website for template and guidance.